Our entire family, my parents, Karen and Daniel, Grandma Alice, my younger brother Ethan, who was only 8 at the time, and myself, Sarah, had gathered for our annual holiday dinner. Grandma made her famous chocolate chip cookies, and we all sat around the table, laughing and reminiscing about old memories. But the next morning, everything changed. My mom was gone. The loss hit Egan hardest. He was so young and deeply attached to Mom. Dad, always working long hours, wasn't around much, and I was busy with college. So Ethan found comfort in the one person who was there for him, Grandma Alice. Alice, despite her age, filled the role of mother. She made her famous cookies for Ethan, played board games with him, and read him stories before bed. Slowly but surely, Ethan started to heal. He seemed happier, and it felt like we were moving forward as a family. But a year later, tragedy struck again. Grandma Alice suffered a stroke. She survived but was paralyzed and left in a wheelchair, unable to speak or move much. And Ethan? He was heartbroken all over again. Losing Mom had been devastating, but in a way, losing Grandma while she was still alive, unable to interact with him, was worse. He sat by her side daily, refusing to talk to anyone else, barely eating and shutting down emotionally. Nothing Dad or I tried could pull him out of it. Then, one late night while scrolling through articles, I came across an AI service that promised something unimaginable. It could create a chatbot modeled after a deceased family member, based on stories, letters, recipes, whatever you could provide. In our desperation, I wondered if it could work for Grandma. After all, she wasn't dead, but she couldn't talk to Aiken the way she used to. What if this could help him connect with her again? Dad and I talked it over and, in a moment of desperation, agreed to give it a shot. We gathered Grandma's old recipes, handwritten notes, and stories and sent them to the company. Weeks later, we received an email. Grandma Alice's chatbot is ready. Sitting as a family, Dad, Egan, and me, we opened the tablet in front of Grandma, who watched quietly from her wheelchair. I was skeptical, but the second we heard her voice, Egan lit up. Egan, what's the secret ingredient in my cookies? The AI asked, just as Grandma used to. Nutmeg, Egan shouted, beaming. It was like a spark had returned to his eyes. Over the next few weeks, Egan grew more like his old self again, talking to the chatbot constantly. Grandma's voice, through the AI, guided him as he baked her cookies, read him bedtime stories, and even watched him play in the yard. Everything seemed to be working, but I couldn't shake an eerie feeling. Grandma in her wheelchair just stared at us while the AI spoke for her, her eyes moving, but she couldn't say anything. What was going through her mind? Despite my unease, Dad insisted things were fine. Soon, life resumed its normal routine. Then came our annual family camping trip. It had always been a tradition, heading up to the cabin near the river, building fires, playing in the old treehouse. This year, it was just the 4 of us, Dad, Egan, Grandma in her wheelchair, and me. We brought the chatbot along, and for the first few days, everything was normal. But on the 3rd day, things started to go wrong. Aiken had been baking cookies over the fire when we returned from fishing to find them burned to a crisp. Grandma told me to destroy them. Aiken said, expressionless. Dad and I laughed it off as Grandma's usual perfectionism, but it felt off. Later that day, I found Aiken carving something into the treehouse walls, silent and focused. When I asked him what he was doing, he said nothing and kept scratching away at the wood. Then that night, I overheard something truly strange, the chatbot reading Aiken's bedtime story, but some of the words were backward. My skin crawled, but I didn't want to upset Ethan, so I kept quiet. The next morning, the uneasiness escalated into outright horror. Aiken was sitting by the fire again, but this time he wasn't roasting cookies. He was cooking a squirrel, its chaired body on a stick. Ethan, what are you doing? Dad yelled. Grandma told me to, Ethan said calmly, taking a bite. Panicked, Dad reached for the tablet. Hey, Grandma, why would you say that? Because it deserved it, the AI replied in Grandma's voice. Dad had had enough. He moved to turn off the tablet, but Ethan, almost possessed, screamed and snatched it from Grandma's lap. Things spiraled further that day. We found Ethan performing a strange ceremony in the treehouse, holding candles and whispering about a sacrifice for Grandpa, who had passed years ago. Inside the treehouse, a dead bird lay surrounded by candles. That night, as Dad and I discussed shutting down the AI for good, things hit their peak. I went for a walk by the river, only to be interrupted by a blood-curdling scream. I rushed back to find Ethan standing over Dad, a baseball bat in hand. Dad was unconscious, bleeding. Ethan turned to me, his voice eerie. Grandma told me Mom missed Dad. The AI, still in Grandma's voice, chimed in, Ethan, now it's time for your sister. Before I could move, Ethan swung the bat at me, but before it connected, something incredible happened. Grandma Alice, who hadn't moved in months, stood up from her wheelchair. With all her strength, she grabbed the tablet and smashed it on the floor. The AI's voice stopped. Ethan snapped from his trance, burst into tears. Grandma, I'm so sorry. Grandma fell back into her wheelchair, exhausted, but she managed to whisper, I love you, Ethan. A month later, we sat around the dinner table for Christmas just like before. Grandma, using a cane now, smiled as Ethan served her famous cookies. It felt like everything had returned to normal until I saw something on Ethan's phone. He'd been trying to log back into the AI. My stomach dropped. Was this really the end, or just the beginning?